Hi, this is Leora Farkovitz with Electronic Advantage, and in this episode we're going to talk about the significance of responsible fatherhood initiative funding and marriage and family funding and access and visitation. So this entire system is set up based upon like we discussed a little bit before, the evidence or proof that about how poverty affects our communities. And so, this is a complicated topic. It's a very complicated topic, and it's a hard thing to necessarily solve. But what's happening right now is that back in the mid-1990s, when Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House, he developed a bill. It was called the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act of 1996. And basically, it was marketed as a way to get rid of deadbeat dads who were not taking care of their kids and not paying child support. And at that time, there was absolutely no recourse for mothers or children to recover unpaid child support. And also to get rid of quote-unquote welfare queens, because there was this, rumor or myth promulgated that, it was a bunch of lazy black women, that were welfare queens who didn't want to work and just wanted to have, illegitimate children and, spawn depravity and decay. But that's just bullshit, because, white people are the ones who mostly get welfare in Republican states. And so it's really not about immigration or minorities or anything like that. It's about whether or not people are, going to step up to their obligations. Now, there are circumstances where people can't do that. It can be because of education, disability, poverty, mental illness. It can be so many different things, that our society is just not really creating a very good safety net for, to be, perfectly honest. Their safety net is just terrible. So whether you believe that, there should be a safety net or not, the way our system is set up right now is under the belief that if the father does not maintain a sort of a traditional control and ability to coerce, if you will, the woman, the mother, and the children, you basically want the father to be involved with his biological family no matter what. It doesn't matter what kind of crime or dysfunction or danger that there is, that they want to prevent that any child would not be financially supported by their father. So everything is skewed in such a way as to support that. And it doesn't mean that fathers shouldn't do that, but what our system fails to do is look at why, what are the points of failure in that. If you have been sexually assaulted, beaten, somebody's attempted to murder you, our system assumes that if you're no longer living together, that you're no longer a danger, and that's just not true. What the statistics show is that when you actually leave, and that's one of the big hashtag questions, why didn't you leave, right? When you leave is when you are 70% most likely to suffer a violent consequence for trying to extract yourself, from a violent, intimate partner. So leaving, they may give you criminal support so that they arrest somebody who hurts you. But as soon as you're in the civil court system, anything that the criminal court set up to protect you and your kids is going to be completely untied and untethered to your protection system, because if the criminal hand is the right hand and the civil hand is the left, these two hands have no idea what's going on with the other. And the laws that are there, like say for instance your husband or father is a criminal, and they're trafficking you or your children, they're pimping you out, or they're selling your work, or whatever they're doing, they're exploiting you. If a stranger did that to you, you'd have different federal laws and programs available to prosecute and protect you through that process. But as soon as that person is identified as a family member, especially a father, then they do everything they can to suppress that evidence. There are no criminal standards. There's no due process standard. You just have to walk through the process of being able to demonstrate that you're not interfering in anything generally known as access and visitation. Anything you do to prevent access from a father to contact, communicate, participate with their child, see their child, to visit their child, to have a normal, functional relationship with them, you are going to be deemed not a protector of your children, but somebody who's damaging them, not because you're putting them in harm's way in terms of a sexual or trafficking crime, but because you're impoverishing them by alienating them from their financial support and their interactive support with their dad. The thing about this that concerns me is that it doesn't take into consideration what the consequences are of being with someone that would be willing to do those kinds of things to you in the first place, right? So the mother or protective parent, it could be a grandparent too, but it's most often a mother. Whenever the protective mother, tries to put protection in place, physical and sexual and social protections in place on behalf of the child, the government is kind of skewed to support that without doing anything to actually protect the child. So the way that we know that this is happening is that if you look before certain international bodies like the Organization of American States, which is where the United States and Canada and Central America and South America all go to address international grievances. So if one of these countries violates your human rights, then you go to the Organization of American States and you file a petition before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And you say, look, according to these international treaties and laws that my country is subject to, as a citizen, I have my rights violated. And then you go about, asking, what to do about that. And in order to be eligible to even use this court, you have to exhaust and you have to go through the process and procedure of submitting your case, exhausting all of your appeals, from this, county, state, and federal courts. And once you've exhausted all of those avenues, then you can file a petition. The petitions take 2 to 5 years to be reviewed, and they have to demonstrate not just that you were maybe individually violated. I mean, I guess you could do that, but they also need to demonstrate that there's like a pattern or some sort of systemic issue that's causing you to be violated, having your human rights violated. So this is my theory about all of these custody cases. There's a bunch of custody cases, 10 to 15 of them, where protective parents presented evidence of sexual assault, pedophilia, trafficking, things of that nature to the family equivalency courts. It can either be actually called a family court, or it can be called a superior court, or they can be different systems in different states. But basically what happens is, once you go to that court and you report that this has been happening and you ask for intervention, because they're skewed towards making sure the father is there to provide financial support and maintain access and visitation no matter what, they sorry, I lost my train of thought. Because they're skewed in that way, if you go there and you ask for help, you don't get it, then there's really not a very good recourse. I mean, you can't report your ex-spouse to CPS, and you may not even want to, because what you see is that every time a child comes in contact with the court system, they're very vulnerable to the exploitation of others. And those can be court-appointed professionals that the courts and the counties hire and have them, execute certain tasks to take the child away, or justify switching custody and removing benefits and support to the protective parent. So annoying. Or any of the things that go on, in that process. So once you've exhausted all of those avenues where you've proven that your child is in danger and that you've tried to get as much help as you can, you've exhausted all those resources, you can file a petition, years will go by, they may or may not bring up your case, and then even if they do, this is the game that the United States is playing on the international front. Under the auspices of sovereignty, where we're saying that no other country has a right to direct or coerce or influence our human rights policies or our international policy or our sovereignty, that when someone comes along and complains that the United States has violated their human rights, the first thing they'll do is they'll say, well, yes, we're members of your organization, but we haven't ratified our obligation to do what you say. And so then at that point, the organization comes back and they say, well, if you want to be a member, you have to adhere to our policies and procedures. And if you're not going to do that, then you can't be considered a member. And then they'll say, oh, okay. Even though we're not signing, or ratifying this agreement, then we're going to comply and say that we're going to adhere to the policies. And then they kind of just, jerk around back and forth for a long time. Well, there's a couple of interesting things that have come about. There was a woman named, I think her name was Ruth Gonzalez. She has a different last name now. But in her case, she had an ex-husband who had been violent with her and with her children. They were divorced. He had visitation, and she began to be concerned that he was going to kidnap their children. So on a certain day, he came to pick up their kids when he wasn't supposed to. And she called the local police department 10 times over the course of 10 hours, begging them to please go and investigate whether or not her ex-husband had their 3 daughters at this amusement park. And so, sure enough, he did. And he took the girls at the end of their day to the police department in their town. And in front of the police department, they have the shootout between him and the police, with the girls in the car. And the girls are killed in the course of this firefight. And she asked the county in the state of Colorado to determine who had actually killed her daughters. Was it him or was it them, in the fight? And she sued them because they had refused to come and intervene and rescue her kids from her ex-husband. And they said that they hadn't done anything wrong and they couldn't be held liable because they only had so many resources available to the police department, and that they had to maintain their ability to determine where they could disperse their resources and who to disperse them for, based on, their best, set of information at the time. So she lost this case before the Supreme Court of the United States. The Supreme Court upheld the state of Colorado and that local municipality's right to figure out how to use their resources. And so even though, she could argue that they had the requirement to protect her ability for, pursuit of life, happiness, liberty, whatever, they didn't have to make up it to her or change their procedures or policies or anything that they did surrounding not protecting her kids. So she lost all 3 children, and I'm pretty sure he killed himself in the course of this, whole event. And the IACHR and the Organization of American States came back and said that her human rights and the human rights of her children had indeed been violated by the failure of the U.S. government to protect her and her children. So in her case, this particular situation was the only one that was being addressed. And there's a group of other mothers, between 7 and 10 people, mothers and children, who each one of these cases was a protective parent where the mother was attempting to protect her child from being sexually assaulted by her former spouse. And in all of these cases, it was a father, a male father, not, homosexuality or anything, or, adult parent-child, anything involved. Well, there is adult-child sexual contact involved, where the father was purported to have been sexually assaulting the children, and the mother was attempting to protect them. So what ended up happening in these cases, the mothers and the children went before the IACHR, and they filed a petition the Friday before Mother's Day in 2007, and they claimed that the United States government had violated their human rights by failing to protect their children. So it took until 2009, and the IACHR agreed to accept this petition and to review the cases. And then a couple of years, went by from 2009 until I think it was maybe even 2013. It was a really long time. And they came back and they said that they would accept the case, but only those in which had actually properly exhausted all of their submission and hearing and appellate case process in the United States. And not all of those cases met that requirement. So in any event, that's what we're at this point. So I believe that because of the way that the federal government compiled their policy and theory and their legislation and the way they appropriated it and dispersed the money as state block grants, that there is a connection between the federal policy and the human rights violations and the way these things have played out in the courts. Now, there's a certain ruling that somebody recently made me aware of, that that there's a ruling that the states are responsible for custody cases. And if that's the case, then, I may be wrong about this theory, but I'm looking for attorneys or paralegals to be able to go through these different cases and to look at the federal policy and to try and make this connection. Because I believe that if you can prove that these parenting violations where the children are not kept safe, from harm, from sexual assault or physical assault or psychological abuse, that their human rights are violated, and that it is a direct result of federal policy and the appropriations of it. So I think that's the fastest way to shut this down. I think it could be shut down very, very quickly in that way. And I also think that where we can show that bad actors are attempting to misuse this funding, that we can shut down their ability to do that, and then normalize the process of actually putting, safeguards in place, not just for fathers, because, sometimes, like in a situation like my own, where, I left my rapist. I mean, my ex-husband raped me, and that's why I divorced him. And I've had to share, custody and co-parent with someone who's deliberately caused me harm for over 15 years now. And my kids have not been able to be protected from that process. So when those sorts of circumstances are happening, I needed to be able to stop, what was happening, and to find a way to heal and to protect myself and to get over the disability of what happened, and to be protected from a crime. This was a criminal action against my person and my body, and not to mention, all the property loss. I've had about $200,000 in financial and property losses through the course of this custody battle and trying to protect my children from this. And we need a way of being able to identify that this happened, to put healing in place and a recovery program in place, and to stop the continuation of this. And I think we could reasonably do that in a pretty short order. It's only 15 cases. If I had 15 good people, I could get this done. So anyway, if you want to search on this before I have a chance to walk through all of the evidence and paperwork online on a piece of paper by piece of paper process, you can look up the the Organization of American States, and also the IACHR, Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and you can search the names Wendy Titleman, Claudine Dromboski, and attorney Diane Post, and see what you think. I'd like to hear what you think.